Today we're going to be talking about PCI compliance. I guess the first thing we need to do is we need to define PCI. So what is PCI DSS? It is Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. This is a general term for the overall companies like Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express, and the rules and standards that they've set up. So now that we've gotten out of the way what PCI is, I guess we just have to talk about what does it mean to be compliant. Well, there is a set of standards that were set up by the payment card industry. These standards are defined as best practices for a business that accepts credit cards for payment in relationship to their computers and computer network. Any business that accepts credit cards, whether it be over an internet, from a terminal, a store, a doctor's office, an attorney's office, just anyone that accepts credit cards must follow these standards. You might be asking, why do I care? Why is it important to me? Well, maintaining a secure network will minimize and hopefully prevent a security breach where the credit card numbers and identifying information are released to a hacker or the public at large. More than 80% of the credit card breaches occur in small businesses. Fines can range from $50 to $3,000 per cardholder per breach, and sometimes per month, unless the breach is resolved. And the fines pass from the credit card company, Visa, MasterCard, to the merchant bank, which is usually the bank that's providing you the service, and then it's passed and trickled down to the business. Now, we all know from our personal credit card, if something gets charged on our card by mistake, that the actual maximum that would come out of our pocket if it's a charge that we didn't authorize is usually about $50. Let's say it's a $500 charge. Where does the other $450 come from? If it is from a data breach that the card was stolen or the number was stolen, and the hacker was able to charge the card and was able to get the money and found a way to keep the money, and it didn't get reversed and removed from their account. Let's say their merchant bank account was closed. The fancy word is subrogation as to who is responsible. Well, the responsibility eventually falls back on the business where the breach was, and that's where these fines come up. Now that I've gotten out of the way the fact that that we've gotten that taken care of, let me talk a little bit about who we are. I want you to know, first of all, that RCOR is not in the business of accepting credit cards, selling credit cards. It's kind of funny. I sent this email out to so many people inviting them, and what I received back was, we already accept credit cards, that's taken care of. And unfortunately, a lot of people didn't see the fact that what we're dealing with here is the security. Sure, I accept credit cards from customers, and but we do not provide merchant bank services, nor am I going to recommend anybody during this presentation that would give you good rates in accepting them. We deal strictly in network security, and not just for the payment card industry, but network security in general. So that's the avenue I'm going to be taking in this talk. And we're going to be talking about what your business needs are to be securely accepting credit cards and able to meet the PCI compliance standards that have been set up so that you can truly pass an audit from your merchant bank should you be given one. Well, before we get started, let me take a moment and introduce myself. My name is Tim Richter, and I am co-founder and cybersecurity specialist at RCOR Technologies. My background includes IT and network security design work for places like Lockheed Martin, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Duke University, GlaxoSmithKline. I started my business more than 10 years ago because I saw that small to medium-sized businesses needed the same level of support that the Fortune 100 companies had, and it was woefully lacking. It has become my passion to deliver the same expert service to this market. And this webinar is how I can continue to show that passion by helping you, the professionals on today in the Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Greensboro area to provide yourselves and your businesses and move you out of the crosshairs of cyber criminals and to keep you safe. Well, let's get started out with some basic questions on why PCI compliance is important. The first question that comes up is, my company doesn't need to store credit card data, so why do PCI standards apply? They really don't, do they? Well, if you accept credit cards as a form of payment, then the PCI DSS compliance standards apply to your business. The storage of credit card data is risky, so if you don't store card data, then becoming compliant is much easier. But this doesn't stop you from having to become and stay compliant with these standards in the industry. Well, what about my business is really small, and do they really apply to me then? Well, the PCI DSS applies to any organization regardless of size, number of transactions it accepts, transmits, whether it stores data, doesn't store data, any of that. All merchants fall into one of 4 merchant levels. Most of the businesses here on the call today will fall into category 4, which is defined as a merchant processing fewer than 20,000 web transactions and less than 1 million transactions non-web or total transactions per month or per year. I'm sorry. This has nothing to do with dollar amounts. And as a quick note, any merchant that is suffered a breach, that what they're going to result in is they're going to be kicked up to a higher level of compliance needs and a higher level of where you're audited. So I'm going to be mainly talking as we go through this about the needs for level 4. So what does a small business size, again, a level 4 merchant, have to do in order to satisfy PCI DSS requirements? Well, to satisfy the requirements of PCI, a merchant must complete the following. They have to complete a self-assessment questionnaire according to the instructions contained therein, and usually your merchant bank provides a website or provides this. Complete and obtain evidence of passing a vulnerability scan. What this is this is going to be a scan that usually is a software, and your merchant bank has you go to a website, log in, and do the scan, and it scans your firewall. Then you complete the relevant attestation of compliance in its entirety. This is usually, about 50 or 60 questions that just ask you about your computer network and about how you provide credit cards. And based on the answers, it tells you whether you're compliant or not. And then you submit this evidence of passing the scan and the your attestation of compliance along with any requested documentation to your merchant bank. And usually that's done on a every year or every 6-month basis. Okay, my business has multiple locations. Is each location required to validate? Well, if your business process is under the same tax ID, then typically you're only required to validate once per location. That's usually once annually. You do have to submit quarterly or semi-annual network scans for, those are the vulnerability scans I was talking about for each location. So they are going to have you go in and do that. So what are the penalties for noncompliance? Well, we'll get back to that one. So PCI standards are only a recommendation and not a requirement, right? No, unfortunately not. In 2004, the major payment brands, American Express, Discover, MasterCard, Visa, and JCB, formed the Payment Card Industry Security Standards Council, that is still there today, as a private regulatory body to facilitate the development of the standard and to act as a common set of minimum security requirements to be implemented by all merchants. On June 30th of 2005, the regulations took effect and are still in effect today. The payment brands themselves enforce the PCI DSS standard for merchants, regardless of size. If your company stores, processes, or transmits any of the information recorded on a credit or debit card, then you must abide by the PCI DSS or face significant fines. higher processing costs through increased compliance requirements and potential suspension of your processing. Now that we have now that these requirements, now that we know that they apply to pretty much every business that doesn't just deal in cash, uh, you know, we've got to look at what the compliance requirements are. Well, there are 6 main requirements that meet a variety of security goals. So let's take a look at what these goals are. The first one is building and maintaining a secure network. In the past, theft of financial records required a criminal to physically enter an organization's business site. Now, many payment card transactions use PIN entry devices and computers connected to networks. By using network security controls, entities can prevent criminals from virtually accessing the payment systems and stealing cardholder data. They can do this by a series of ways. Probably the biggest is to install and maintain a firewall configured to protect data. Companies must create their own firewall configuration policy and develop a configuration test procedure designed to protect cardholder data. So they're going to establish a firewall and router configuration standards that formalize testing whenever configurations change and identify all connections to cardholder data, including wireless, that use various technical settings for each implementation. And they stipulate a review of configuration rule sets at least every 6 months. Build firewall and router configurations that restrict all traffic from untrusted network and hosts except for protocols necessary for the cardholder data environment. To prohibit public access between the internet and any components that deal with cardholder data, and install personal firewall software on mobile and employee-owned computers with direct connectivity to the network that are using or accessing the organization's network. As you can see, this doesn't just apply to uh, your cardholder data, it also applies just to general safe security. So the next is do not use vendor supplied system default passwords and other security parameters. The easiest way for a hacker to access your internal network is to try default passwords and exploits on default software settings in your payment infrastructure. Far too often, merchants do not change default passwords or settings under deployment. This is akin to leaving a brick and mortar store physically unlocked, then you go home for the night. Default passwords and settings for most network devices are widely known. This information, combined with hacking tools that show what devices are on your network, can make unauthorized entry just a really simple task if you fail to change these. Always change vendor supplied defaults before installing a system on the network. This includes, again, wireless devices. Develop configuration standards for all components that address all known security vulnerabilities and are consistent with industry accepted definitions. Update your configuration standards as new vulnerabilities are there. Encrypt and use strong cryptography on all non-console administrative access, such as browsers and web-based management tools. And of course, shared hosting providers must provide each entity's hosted environment and cardholder data security. The next goal is to protect the cardholder data. You protect stored data. This requirement only applies to companies that actually store the data. Specifically, companies that do not automatically store the cardholder data are already avoiding a possible security breach, often targeted by identity theft. So a PCI-compliant hosting provider should provide multiple layers of defense and a security protection model, a plan that combines physical and virtual security methods. By physical, we're talking about restricting access to servers and storage and networking by locking them away and not allowing everyone in there. Virtually, by including authorization, authentication, secure passwords, and so forth. Criminals may be able to also intercept transmissions of cardholder data over open public networks. So it is important to prevent their ability to view this data. Encrypt transmissions of cardholder data across these networks. Encrypted data is unreadable and unusable to a system intruder without the proper keys. Those are very long sets of numbers that are used to decode or decrypt the data and make it again readable. As an added security measure, sensitive authentication data, including card validation codes or PIN numbers, must never be stored after authorization, even if the data is encrypted. The next goal will be to maintain a vulnerability management program. Use and regularly update antivirus and anti-malware software. An antivirus software service needs to be frequently updated to protect against the most recently developed malware. Also, your software must complete a heuristic scan that looks for virus and malware-like activity, notifying you for analysis. If your data is being hosted on outsourced servers, a managed service provider must be responsible for maintaining a safe environment, including generating audit logs. Develop and maintain secure systems and applications. This includes discovering newly identified security vulnerabilities via alert systems. Your PCI compliant hosting provider should be monitoring and updating their systems to accommodate for any security vulnerabilities. Make sure that routine audits and logs are generated to show compliance. Security vulnerabilities in systems and applications may allow cyber criminals to access cardholder data. Many of these vulnerabilities are eliminated by installing vendor-provided security patches. Yes, I know that means running Windows updates. And it means going and checking your firewalls for firmware updates. And it means checking all of your third-party applications. Managed service provider can help you with these. Next is implement strong access control measures. Restrict access to cardholder data by business need to know. Limit the number of personnel that have access to it. That'll lessen your chance of a security breach. Assign a unique user ID or name to each person with computer access. In other words, my suggestions are do not have the receptionist log in as reception. Have them log in under their own so that when they log off, another person can log in. User accounts with access should follow the best practices, including password encryption, authorization authentication, password updates every 30 days, login time limits, etc. Restrict physical access to your important data. If your data is hosted in an offsite data center, your data center provider should have limited personnel with access to the sensitive information. PCI compliant data centers should have full monitoring, including surveillance cameras, entry authentication to ensure a secure and PCI compliant hosting environment. Ensure all visitors are authorized before entering areas where you have secure data being processed or maintained. Given some type of physical token, as simple as a little badge that expires, and that identifies the visitor as a non-on-site personnel, and they're asked to surrender that badge or personal token before they leave the facility and or at the date of expiration. Physically secure all media. Store media backups off-site in a secure location. Regularly monitor and test networks. Track and monitor all access to network resources and cardholder data. Logging systems that track user activity and stored archives can help you and your hosting provider pinpoint the cause in the event of a security breach or other issue. Regularly test the security systems and processes. And I don't mean once a year, I mean once every 6 months or possibly even once every quarter. This is an area that we found that most businesses fall short, but it's an easy thing to do by just setting an appointment in your calendar. With regular monitoring and testing processes in place, you should be able to assure that your customers' cardholder data and other sensitive data is safe at all times. Secure audit trails so that they cannot be altered. In other words, make sure that the logs are read-only. Review these logs for all system components related to secure functions at least monthly. Retain audit trail history for at least 1 year and have at least 3 months of history at immediate access and availability for analysis. Finally, maintain an information security policy. A strong security policy sets the tone for security affecting an organization's entire company, and it informs employees of their expected duties related to security. All employees should be aware of their responsibility for protecting private company data. This not only includes credit card data, but also client, patient, and any other sensitive internal company data that is out there. Maintain a policy that addresses information security. This policy should uh, includes acceptable uses of technology, reviews and annual processes for risk analysis, operational security procedures, and other general administrative tasks. Wow, we have just covered in the last 25 minutes a tremendous amount, and there are a lot of things that are out there that need to be addressed where PCI compliance is concerned. It gets really technical. Where do we go from here? Well, there's 3 ongoing steps to adhering to the PCI DSS. The first is to assess. Identify your secure data, cardholder data, any data that is in your business that needs to be secured. Take an inventory of your IT assets and personal and business processes for payment processing and for day-to-day utilization of any secure data, and analyze them for vulnerabilities that could expose this data. Next is to remediate. Fix the vulnerabilities where PCI credit card data is concerned. Unless you really have to, don't store it. Finally, report. Compiling and submitting required remediation validation records and submitting compliance reports to your merchant bank and credit card brands that you do business with is something that you'll need to do on a regular basis. A lot of times, many businesses never deal with their PCI compliance, not knowing that if you ask your merchant bank, you can save on processing fees by showing that you're compliant. Now, I know that at some point in the webinar that a lot of you have become somewhat overwhelmed. This is where a true managed service provider that is your partner in both computer and network security comes into play. If you don't have one, seek one out, and they should be able to help you during this process. Well, that's what I have to talk about today with security and PCI compliance. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to call my office. We're at 919-313-9355. You can also email me directly. My first name, Tim, at RCOR. That's RCOR.com. 919-313-9355 or TIM at RCOR.com. Thank you very much.